Dave, welcome to the Jay Garcia podcast. I only like to have interesting guests, and so that's the reason why you're here today.
Thank you.
Today you're representing, well, I looked at your background, and you have been working with a lot of interesting people in your professional career, right? But today you're representing the CHAdeMO people, right? And so
CHAdeMO North America. Yes.
CHAdeMO North America. And so that's why we want to talk to you, because as you know, I like electric cars. I converted a car 10 years ago, and it's a DIY version, but I always wanted the DIY crowd always dreams of the day that we can do our DIYs and fast charge them, right? And it's happened here and there, but I think it hasn't happened fully, right? Not all of us can do it yet. And so, yeah, one of those dreams was always to connect to the CHAdeMO, because you guys were kind of early on, one of the first ones that kind of spread. You guys had a lot of success with the leaves, right? That's where the CHAdeMO was and stuff. And so, yeah, let's talk about that. What part of what role do you play there at CHAdeMO?
Sure. I'm responsible for the North American CHAdeMO. We've never had a real formal association here in North America. We've had a few meetings. Back when I was with Mitsubishi Motors, I was chief engineer for Mitsubishi Motors, responsible for their electric vehicle program for 14 years.
Wow.
And so I was tasked at one point to help support CHAdeMO in North America. And so I was basically the volunteer spokesperson for years and years. I would go to all the different conferences and committee meetings and things like that and represent CHAdeMO. And why? Because CHAdeMO is the pioneer of vehicle quick charging. And the important part of that is, they've been charging, battery, forklifts and aircraft vehicles with lead acid batteries, for long time. But the difference is that was always just plugging in a massive amount of electricity and just blasting the battery. And it was always charger based. So the charger would set the charging level of the batteries, but there was no closed loop control. So they blow up batteries because it'd be a battery that had some sort of fault or short and just blow it up because there's no feedback circuit. Yeah. So back at the beginning in the early 2000s, Tokyo Electric Power Company, that's the big utility in Japan, Mr. Anagawa, Takafumi Anagawa, they call him Crazy Anagawa. Okay. Because he looked at electric vehicles and the coming age of electric vehicles as very important for the health of the world and the environment, but also for utility companies. They get to sell more electricity. And so one of the things that they really identified early is if they look at Tokyo with all the high-rise buildings and the high density, how are they going to charge all these vehicles? And so that's when they started thinking about quick charging. But quick charging then must be important, that it has to be safe, and it has to be safe not just for the customer and the vehicle, but for the grid, because they're a utility company. They are not a car company, they're a utility company. So safety to them is another level of importance above even car companies. So their team worked on what became CHAdeMO. And the idea was that there was a communication between the vehicle and the charger, and that they had a communication linkage by CAN bus communication. And so you plug in a vehicle, the charger would say, hey, are you a vehicle? And the vehicle would say, yep, I'm a vehicle, and this is how much electricity I want. This is the charging level. Give it to me at this charging level. And as the charge cycle would go along, the charger would be commanded by the vehicle to reduce. Simple concept, simple and very safe. To this date, there has not been a single charging accident with a CHAdeMO charger.
Wow.
And so, this is back in 2005. And as things start, that was back in the days that I was working on electric vehicles with our folks at Mitsubishi in the R&D division. And back in 2005, there was like 4 guys working on electric vehicles.
It was early, in the early days.
Yeah, because everybody, across town from Mitsubishi, Toyota City is right next door, and it was all about hybrids in 2005. And
Yes.
everybody would ask me, Dave, when's Mitsubishi going to come out with a hybrid? And it's like, well, we're kind of working on electric vehicles. And they're like, electric vehicles, they'll never work. You got to go hybrid. And look where we are now. We were actually right at the time. So the story goes with CHAdeMO, they developed this standard as an experimental. And it was adopted by Mitsubishi and Subaru and Honda and Nissan and Toyota. And that was the basis of the CHAdeMO organization back then. It wasn't called CHAdeMO until 2009. But at that time, everybody started developing test vehicles that were using the CHAdeMO standard to be able to quickly charge their batteries. So CHAdeMO has been they're the originator of it, and they're the pioneers of it. And the whole purpose of it was to provide electric vehicle charging for all of these customers in all these high density areas.
Yes. So yeah, that is the difference between CHAdeMO and just regular charging. For those of you who might be watching this and don't know, like there's different levels of charging. And usually at home, when you buy an electric car, it's AC charging. It's usually like 3.3 kilowatt to 6.6 kilowatt. I think that's what this is going. But CHAdeMO's, it's up to 50, up to 100. What's the capacity, the upper capacity of CHAdeMO?
Up to 150 right now.
Up to 150.
Yeah.
Okay.
But all the CHAdeMO chargers that have been rolled out are in the ballpark of 50. There's some that go as low, they go to 25 and 20. But most of them are 50 is pretty much standard. And about 5 years ago, they rolled out some that are going up to 100 and 125.
Okay. Yeah. So to give you an idea, it's charging really quick, right? You're charging in minutes as opposed to hours in a lot of cases, right? And so that's the revolutionary thing about DC fast charging. It's that it charges very quick. The charger is outside of the vehicle. The AC charging, the actual charger is inside. And so whatever, you're kind of capped at whatever equipment you carry on board. But when you go to one of these DC charging stations, the charger is there in the actual unit, right? It's almost like the gas pump, that little box that's standing there. That's your charger. And that could vary. It could be a little one or it could be a bigger one. It could even increase in the future. And so that's the I think that's the biggest Achilles heel of the electric vehicle is the charging time, right? Because you can't, or traditionally you weren't able to quickly replace that energy, that fuel that you used in there. And so DC fast charging was the thing that it's making it possible to travel with EVs. And so
Definitely.
Yeah, CHAdeMO was one of the first ones. Yeah. So it's pretty much all the Japanese car manufacturers that have it, that are members of that, right? Have there been other manufacturers that are outside Japanese that?
Oh yeah, the CHAdeMO organization. There's 480 members worldwide.
Wow. Okay.
And the very interesting thing is we're talking about fake news. You can hear fake news saying basically that, CHAdeMO is only used by Nissan and Mitsubishi. And that's exactly wrong. The truth of that is CHAdeMO is used by BMW, Citroën, Honda, Hyundai, Kia, Jaguar, Land Rover, Mazda, Mercedes,
Wow.
Nissan, Peugeot, Porsche, Subaru, Toyota, and Volkswagen.
Oh, wow. Okay. So there are
But
versions, there are vehicles that have the CHAdeMO technology in the plug from all those companies.
yeah, and because the basic is that Japan has 7,700 CHAdeMO stations all
Ah,
over Japan.
okay.
And if you want to sell an electric vehicle in Japan, you
You
need to
have to
have a
join.
CHAdeMO plug
Ah, okay. Yes.
because they have done an amazing job of spreading the infrastructure all over Japan.
Ah,
Uh,
okay.
when you drive somewhere in Japan, you don't have to think about, well, I got to pull up my map to know where the next charging station is because I'm, concerned if I'm going to have enough charge. Now, next rest area that you come to, you pull in. If there's a gas station, there's probably a charging station. That's
Yeah.
how much the infrastructure has grown in Japan, that it really is. I have friends in Japan who have driven Nissan Leafs to the top of Hokkaido, all the way as south as far as possible, and didn't have a single problem finding charging along the way. And
Yeah.
so, CHAdeMO has over 35,000 charge points worldwide. There's
Okay.
6,000 here in North America. There's 16,000 in Europe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So when you hear people talking about how CHAdeMO is this other standard, it's like, no. CHAdeMO, there's over 2 million vehicles worldwide that are compatible with the CHAdeMO standard. That's more than anything else. That's equal to the Chinese standard GBT, and it's far in excess of all the other charging standards combined. Now,
Mm.
CHAdeMO, but I got to just be cautious here. Is somebody's going to say, "What about Tesla?"
Yeah.
Tesla's actually uses CHAdeMO
Ah, in Japan.
all over here in the U.S. They have a common little adapter that they plug their port into, and then they
Yeah.
plug it into a CHAdeMO station. And so Teslas are part of that. So there's basically it's about half and half between CHAdeMO native and Teslas. There's about 1 million each worldwide. So
Yeah.
you talk about there are CHAdeMO. There's more people charging with CHAdeMO than just about any other standard.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I have looked in here in Southern California, and it didn't seem to be too many of them. I know that for the large part, they're like a Nissan um, dealers here in Southern California, right? At least in the part where I'm at, I kind of remember like looking at it and be like, oh, there's one there, there's one over here, there's one over there, and then every time you look, it's like, oh, it's at a Nissan dealer. And that's because it was very popular, right? I mean, all the leaves in North America were CHAdeMO. Well, they were level 2 and CHAdeMO, right? They had two plugs in there.
Yeah, and that was also because at the very beginning, back 2009, 2010, Nissan released the Leaf as
Hmm.
the first full electric vehicle in the
Yeah.
United States, that production electric vehicle, and they were very dissatisfied at the rollout of CHAdeMO chargers, and so
Ah.
they themselves supported a development program that they came up with a low cost CHAdeMO charger that they made available to their dealers. And their
Yeah.
dealers that wanted to sell the Leafs installed the CHAdeMO charger at their location. So those chargers, actually, many of those have basically have they've been replaced a couple times over because they've been so old and they've been there for so long.
Yeah.
But CHAdeMO is in numerous locations. I myself am surprised sometimes when I'm out and I pull up my PlugShare app looking for some place to charge my car, and I find some place that I didn't even know, and I pull around the building, and there's shopping centers that have, now it's very, very common. EV Go, ChargePoint have stations that have multiple standards. So you can easily find a CHAdeMO port just about anywhere you go these days.
Yes.
It's much better than it was 10 years ago, I'll tell you. There's a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
smile on my face.
Yeah, definitely. Like charging, it's not what, especially here in Southern California. There's quite a bit of it, right? When you look in the map, it's just like you you zoom out, and it's just Southern California. It's just charging everywhere, just the red little dots everywhere, right? So definitely, it's easy to drive an electric car here in Southern California, no problem. I mean, you'll find charging. Uh, and you'll find whatever, it's like there's like almost everything here. So, what's the future look like, right? Because I think here in the States, not every car has that, right? I think it seems like now there's like a wars. It was like something akin to like the VHS and the Beta wars that happened in Japan with the video tapes, thing, right? Eventually, one of them ended up winning the other one or whatever. For a while, there was both standards were available, and they were different, and they were used for different things. But then, the mass market basically chose one over the other one. Do you see that? Is that fair to say that that's what's happening here with CHAdeMO and now CCS Combo, which is another one that is a competing, and I guess it's a newer standard, right? That also does fast charging DC on cars.
Yeah, this is pretty funny because I was part of those discussions at SAE. I was part of the SAE 1772 committee.
Okay.
And I was there at all of those discussions. And I remember back in 2009, 2010, forgive my inaccuracy, I was there. I just didn't mentally tattoo the date on my forehead. But, I remember that we were discussing this about how to go forward with standardizing electric vehicle charging. And by that time, CHAdeMO had been around for 4 or 5 years. And we came into the meeting, and one of the suppliers came into the meeting and threw a charging cord down on it that was a CHAdeMO cord and said, well, what do we need to standardize? Here it is. It's all done. It's all complete. Why don't we standardize around this? We don't need to develop anything. And we were happy to do this. I was representing CHAdeMO at the time and said, we're happy to make the IP available, and let's work forward to continue to develop this standard. But strangely, at the time, the chairman from General Motors for the SAE committee said, "No, thank you very much, but no thanks. We're going to go a different direction." And that's where the conflict started, because the SAE committee and what has become CHARIN, they started developing a competing standard. And they say, well, why is there competing standards? And well, there's competing standards because you created it. Because I sat at a meeting with all of them. It was a closed door meeting that we were talking about this stuff and we basically said, you know what? CHAdeMO would like to work with you guys, and let's work together to create even a better standard. If you guys want to develop a standard, let's create even a better standard. Mm-hmm. And they arrogantly said, we have the better standard. It's right here. It's CCS. And we looked at them and we said, it's exactly the same as CHAdeMO with a different form.
Oh.
And
at that time it was new? It wasn't like established.
No, they hadn't. It was writing on a piece of paper. It wasn't even a prototype at that point.
Oh wow, okay.
And we had cars that were already out there charging on CHAdeMO connectors, and so there's always been this conflict, and we've never engaged it. We're not. There's no CHAdeMO. There's no world domination involved in this. CHAdeMO, the whole point of it is that we pioneered this so that people could drive electric vehicles. It was needed. And to this day, we still keep our hands open and say, we'd be happy to work with the CHARIN group to come together to have one single standard that does all the things that CHAdeMO does, is backward compatible to all the existing electric vehicles, but has additional features. Mm-hmm. And and then when we hear from the other group is like, well, yeah, we could all standardize. Please adopt our standard.
But at that time, it didn't exist. Their standard was
It didn't
just
even exist at that
it's an
time.
idea.
Yeah.
Well, why? So why would a manufacturer now choose one over the other one? Why? Like, it's kind of hard to understand that from a consumer end, right? Especially like me, I own a Tesla, I DIY, right? And so
Yeah.
I understand level 2 perfectly, right? I know the
Right.
differences. But then the Tesla charging network, we understand it because so I never use CHAdeMO on a daily basis or even to charge or a CCS combo. So from my perspective, it's kind of hard to like see. Oh, okay, so these are two different competing standards. What would what would I like Rivian, for example? That's my next car, right? We pre-ordered that and stuff. What would Rivian take into consideration to choose either CHAdeMO or CCS combo?
That's the big question that's going on right now within industry. And Nissan actually, with their announcement of the Aria, is a classic example of that. You know, what they are looking at, just like the list that I came down for, I rattled off before of automakers. If they want to do business in Japan, they have a CHAdeMO. And the question that Nissan was asking, kind of as a test, is do they sell more Arias in the United States if they adopt CCS? Is there more CCS than CHAdeMO, or do the customers prefer CCS over CHAdeMO? And no one knows. Nissan has not decided that from now on that they're going to drop CHAdeMO. They just adopted this one vehicle to ask this question of, do you design the charging for the market? Because remember, there's 5 fast charging standards worldwide. There's 2 called CCS. There's the CCS in North America, and then there's the CCS in Europe. But they're not compatible.
They're
not
different.
The same. They're
even
different.
Connector and everything, right? One's 3-phase.
Yeah. And so, you know, you have Tesla, you have CCS1, CCS2, you have GBT for China, and you have CHAdeMO. So there's 5 standards worldwide. But the question is is it better to have a regional solution, or is it necessary to have a global solution?
Yeah.
And as CHAdeMO, you know what? We're not interested in dominating the world with the standard. We're interested in making electric vehicle charging available to EV drivers.
Yeah. And there are challenges with making a globalized standard, right? Because I think Europe has different electricity. It's got 3-phase. It's fairly common here. We're here in America. We don't have it. And so maybe that's the reason why you can't just easily pick one and then go, that's it. That's what we're using from here on, kind of thing.
Yeah, because we don't even have global vehicles.
Yes.
The automotive industry has been fighting this battle for a long time, is that vehicles are different in every different market. There's different standards, there's different requirements, but there's different customers. If you look at the vehicles, especially, I think it's entertaining when I was working for Mitsubishi, looking at the vehicle designs for Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, their idea of a attractive vehicle is much different than in the North American market.
Really? They have a different eye.
Oh yeah. You look at some of the ones for Thailand, you look at them and you go, that's very interesting. I won't drive that.
Okay.
And so when you look at that, you know, the vehicle design themselves is global, or is regional. It's not global. So why does charging need to be global?
Yeah, I think there's an argument because it's not needed. Like the same challenges that like maybe electric charging faces in Japan, for example, are different than here, right? Like here we have so much more, land. Things are separated so much farther. So you're putting in more miles in between charging. So maybe you need more of those and maybe more, like closer together maybe than over there or something like that. So there are definitely differences by region of how customers use a vehicle. And so
And that's a really interesting point, is the way the customers use the vehicle. One of the things that has been developed in CHAdeMO, because CHAdeMO is ahead of the other charging standards just on the development curve. That, you know, they've been working on this standard for 15 years, where other standards have been more like 10 years. And so
Yeah.
by 2012, CHAdeMO had a fully capable vehicle to grid interface. And so by 2012, there's CHAdeMO cars that can take the power off the battery and provide it to the grid, provide it to the house, provide it to a building, whereas other standards are not there even today.
Yes.
And
And that is a very interesting subject because really the exciting thing about electric cars in the future is the fact that they could be a distributed energy source, right? Or a utility, energy utility, because they're what happens with cars, they have such a big battery, and when you combine them all together, we all have one in our garage, then it becomes a real good source of energy that the grid can use to supplement or to even, you know, for anything. And so, yeah, as far as I know, Chatham's the only one that has a vehicle to grid.
CHAdeMO is the only one that has a production ready vehicle to grid.
Yes. Now, no manufacturers have taken up that, right? Or there are vehicles which you can already do that with.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, there are. Okay.
All the Mitsubishi i-MiEV, the Mitsubishi Outlander, the Nissan Leaf, they are all vehicle.
Oh, I see.
Even more entertaining to me is the Toyota Mirai fuel cell vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
It's vehicle to grid compatible.
Oh,
It's a
so
fuel cell vehicle without a battery pack, but in the trunk there is a CHAdeMO port to be able to do bidirectional.
really? So that
Yes.
that means you're burning. What would the fuel be? Hydrogen?
Hydrogen. Yeah, you're burning
Hydrogen?
hydrogen to create electricity to power your house or your power your,
Oh,
yeah,
wow. Yeah, it
yeah,
becomes a clean hydrogen powered generator.
exactly. And
Yeah.
that is the big point, is especially, well, the story goes is Fukushima happened. You know,
Yeah.
there was the
That's when
tsunami.
that's when we all learned the name TEPCO.
Yeah, we learned the name TEPCO. Yes,
Yes.
trust me.
Yes.
Mr. Anagawa was the point person for the Fukushima disaster. He worked for TEPCO, did all of that stuff, and had to walk away from his dreams of electric vehicles for a number of years to save TEPCO.
Yeah.
And so he worked there very hard on that. But the important part of the Fukushima story was, at the time, all the EVs, all my R&D EVs for Mitsubishi, all the R&D Nissan cars, every manufacturer grabbed all their electric vehicles and brought them back to Japan and made them available for the disaster relief.
No way.
because
Okay.
because what they were able to do is they were able to establish the electric vehicle infrastructure that much quicker than the fuel infrastructure. So they used all these electric vehicles at the time to be able to move people around that weren't able to have any transportation except for electric vehicles. And so based on that, they really expedited the continued development of vehicle to grid to be able to use that power. Mitsubishi came out with a small off-board uh, box that they called the MiEV power box, and you could plug it into the port, the CHAdeMO port, and you could plug in a rice cooker. You could plug in a coffee maker. You could basically get 1,500 watts of electricity off the battery from the i-MiEV and be able to power simple electronics. And then from there, Nissan came up with the Leaf to Home system, which was a big 10 kilowatt unit that they had in a garage, and they were able to take the power off from the Nissan Leaf and provide it to the building. And so CHAdeMO has been doing this for quite a while, and we have some manufacturers now that have demonstration projects here in North America. There's one down at UC San Diego, a company named Nuvi. They're they are powering the EV fleet and also the microgrid on the University of San Diego with electric vehicles.
Wow.
And that's what we're looking at. They're looking at that with school buses. They're looking at that with buildings. All of these things that they're looking at using the batteries on vehicles to provide backup power. But even more important these days is because of the fires and all the problems we've been having here in California and the shutdowns before, whenever there's wind conditions, they're shutting down the grid. There's a lot of people that are looking at their battery electric vehicle and saying, why can't I plug my house into this so that when the grid comes down, I can plug in my house? Yep. And there's a number of really interesting companies that are working on products right now that are going to be able to use that and demonstrate that's going to be able to power your house when the grid electricity goes down.
Is down. Yeah, so that for those of you who are listening to like that is the holy grail here, right? It's like you have this giant battery that is parked in your garage. Most of the time is doing nothing. When you really look at when you're using your car, most Americans only use it for like 30 minutes a day or something. And then the rest of the time, sitting there doing nothing, right? And they're the biggest batteries that you probably have ever seen, probably ever own. And so why don't we put it to use? And the vehicle to grid thing is where it's connected to the grid and there is energy going back and forth as whatever the grid needs. If the grid needs it right now, they'll take it from the battery, right? But then if there's a surplus, then they'll shove it back into the battery and then they keep it charged. But then what you're talking about now is, a real problem that here in California we are experiencing. And it's the interruptions of service for different reasons, right? Because the grids are unstable because of the whole, because they're private, and whenever there's wind, there's a danger of fires, right? And so since apparently a bunch of us up there in California, they sued PG&E, and they had to settle for something like $13 billion because they basically killed a whole town. They burned it down, right? Because they couldn't keep their lines safe. Now what they're doing is they're just shutting their power down. And so, you're right. Why can't we just use that battery, this giant battery that is sitting in our garage for most of the day? Why can't we use it? And you're right. You can use it. We have a Tesla. I have mine over here. It's not set up to use it. I mean, I could do it on my DIY if I take out some cables and a wrench and, go DIY on it. But, most people don't have the ability to do that. And I can't do that with my Tesla. My Tesla doesn't have a bidirectional way to go out. I think it could easily be done, but I don't think Elon thinks it's an important thing. And in fact, he said that publicly, right? But so CHAdeMO is probably the only way that we will be able to do that quick, right? Because, like I said, it's being used in Japan already. And do you have any more details about the companies that are looking into doing that here? What does that look like? What is it? Is it going to be expensive, or do we have to wait a few years, or is it it's just around the corner?
There's other companies that are doing it. Fermata is a company that's coming up to do that. They're looking at it right now. That they've got a demonstration project that they're going to be providing information about really soon. And the price is becoming really reasonable, or the price goals from many manufacturers are very reasonable, comparable to gas-powered generators.
Yes.
But now you don't have a gas power. The problem with gas-powered generators, and I've discussed this with a number of utilities all over the United States, the problem with gas-powered generators is they sit outside or they sit in the garage for 6 months, 8 months, a year. The gasoline gets old. The spark plug needs to be replaced, so that when the grid goes down, you got to pull out the flashlight and fix your generator so that you can power your house. Whereas your car is sitting there in the garage too, and all you got to do is plug the car in, and you're good to go.
Yeah, that is a challenge. Like, you can't just store a car, like a classic car in your garage and just forget about it.
Right.
Like, there's no, it won't start the next time. If you leave it a year there, it just won't. And that's a thing with generators. They require an upkeep. You have to go and fire them up every once in a while. There's like this whole thing. And you're right. If it's your car, you're always using it. It's working. Or that it's not working, it has an issue until you know that you're not going to be able to have that. And then also there's noise. Generators are noisy for the most part. They pollute it quite a bit because it's kind of unregulated, right? Anything of those smalls.
They're regulated now. Everything in California is well regulated at this point. But yes, they're noisy, and they do create emissions.
Yeah.
Whereas the electric vehicle, even how they've implemented it with the CHAdeMO, is that you plug in one of these vehicle to grid appliances, the vehicle knows what its charge level is, and it will shut off before it kills before it drains its battery. It shuts off at a level so that you can go charge your car. So if the next town over has electricity, you can drive your car to the next town, charge your car up to 100%, and then bring it home and plug your car back in, and your house is now back up and powered.
Yes. Yeah, that is.
And what's really interesting is that the utilities are called Eversource. It's the Northeast utilities for the New England area. They have many power outages due to ice storms and things like that. They've done many surveys with their customers. And interesting, what their customers are most interested about these days is maintaining not their electricity, not their refrigerator, not the heater, but their communications. Can they charge their cell phone? Can they charge their laptop computer? Can they be in communication with their families to say, hey, we're all right? And that's easy to do off the car. That's only a little bit of power, and that can last a long time running it off the car.
Yes. Yeah. These cars have giant batteries.
Yeah.
So you can run your house for days. If you're just running, critical loads, they'll last you for months. I mean, it's a huge battery. You're right. Here's the other thing. 2020 has taught us that how reliant we are on being connected. Right? Like most of us, or a large part of us, are working at home remotely. Right? Yeah. And, when PG&E decides that they don't want to make sure their lines are safe, and they're like, no, it's too risky. If we cause another fire, you're gonna sue us. Well, just turn it off. And this is okay. In the last 2 months, I've had 2 of these shutdowns. Wow. And one of them has been 12 hours.
Wow.
Now, imagine that's a day that my neighbors here. Now, luckily, I hoard a bunch of batteries. I have a warehouse with like megawatts of batteries. I was up and running, you know what I mean? But my neighbors aren't, you know what I mean? Like it was funny because there's a big factory here right next door to us. I kind of don't like them because they run 24/7 and they make pipes or something, and their machinery's loud. And it's always there. It's just this constant noise where like they don't oil their machines. I don't know. I think that's just a normal noise that they have to make. But it sounds like loud, right? And I remember that day I came out and it was just quiet. And I'm like, oh, these guys have to go home because there's no power. And without power, no one can you can't get work done. And I think a lot of people that were at home and they're working at home, if you can't be on Zoom, if you can't have the thing, if kids are being, they're learning remote learning right now, if you have no power, so it really, life kind of stops. Our modern way of life kind of stops. And people don't realize that until they're up into this new reality. This is happening here in California. But I think in many places it's happening, right? Earlier in the year, I think it was happening in Australia, where they were having trouble keeping their grids up on, online and stuff. And I think many other places it's happening, right? And so having a vehicle to grid system, I mean, that's a dream. That is the dream. And not only that, like having energy independence, it's a goal that we should all have. I think it's also going to help the grids. I think the grids need vehicle to grid because I think what people don't understand is that whenever there is like a huge demand on the grid, whenever we all go home, let's say there's a hot day, extra hot, and we all go home and turn our ACs on full blast or whatever, the grid sees a lot of stress. And in order to alleviate that stress, what they have to do is they have to fire it up extra power plants, or they have to sometimes, make deals with other grids that are neighboring and get some of their power, So they have to do all these deals, and sometimes that costs a lot of money. Sometimes it costs a lot of money to have power plants that are just standby there, just so they can meet that demand, right? And so vehicle to grid could help that, because if we all have our electric vehicles connected to the grid, charging or just an idling there, like most of them do all day, then that's how we can fix the surges and the problems, and that's why we can keep from having to pay maybe top dollar to get someone else's electricity. Here in California, I think what we have to do sometimes, because there's problems on both sides. Also, sometimes there's not enough electricity, but sometimes there's too much electricity, right? And I heard there's a surplus. And so we have to pay other states, neighboring states. This has happened, where we have to pay them just to take our excess electricity. And so we're like, if we have a bunch of electric cars, we could just dump it all in those batteries, And so it would fix so many problems, I think, and that our grids are now having, right? And the reason why they're becoming unstable is because of all that, right? There's an increasing demand that they're having trouble keeping up with, and then also trying to keep the power line safe, because of the fires and the whole thing. I think all that could be eliminated, I think, with vehicle to grid. So it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we should all strive to do.
Absolutely, because there's so many, when you look at what's going to happen in California and many of the states, there's going to be so many more electric vehicles. People get concerned that if they take the energy off my car, I'm not going to be able to get home. But when there's millions of these cars, even now, the amount of cars that there are, electric vehicles out there that could be plugged in and charging, they would only be taking a small amount of electricity off, just a small amount. Even sometimes, people, before COVID, when we parked our cars in parking lots and went in the office building, all those cars are sitting in the parking lot for 8 hours.
Do nothing.
If they're sitting there and they're being charged for like 2, after that 2, they can go up and down and be discharged and recharged and discharged and recharged, and just fall and help the grid. That lowers the the cost of electricity for all of us.
Yeah.
Because what you were saying, those power plants out there, those expensive power plants, we pay for those to run.
We pay for those.
The ratepayers, we're the ones that pay the bill at the end of the day. And so if our cars are out there and they're replacing these expensive power plants, then our total electricity cost goes down. And that's good for all of us.
Yeah, and then they could be schemes. Like right now, utilities will give you a discount if you put like a switch on your AC.
Yep.
On your AC, equipment, right? So they have the ability to shut it down if they have a big surge of energy and they can't meet the demand, so then they throttle down your thing, and they'll give you money for that.
Yeah.
Right? If you have energy storage in your building, in your warehouse, they'll sign a contract with you for the rights to use that energy. And it could be quite a bit of money, actually, because they're quite desperate. They're in the business of buying energy. And if you somehow have energy, then they would pay you money. So even in a future when we all have electric cars, it could be a scheme where we get money for having our battery going up and down while it sits there idling in the parking lot, right? And so we have to kind of look into that. It's not just for for the good of of society and stuff. But it could also be a means of like saving money, because whatever you're getting paid for it, you can just deduct it from the average overall cost of your running a vehicle or whatever.
Well,
So
we're not talking about pennies here either. There's a number of these demonstration projects that have been successful. There's been one in Hawaii. There's the University of Delaware has been doing this for a long time. UCSD has been doing it. Fermata's doing it. Nuvi's doing it. They're doing it in Europe. They know that this isn't just a couple dollars here or there. They're talking that you can get a couple $100 a month for being able to take the power off your car.
yeah,
Now, when there's millions and millions of cars and only a little power is coming off the car, we might not get a couple $100 a month, but it's better than nothing.
yeah,
And
it's
it
gonna
helps.
yeah, the grid, right?
Exactly.
Nobody likes to be there and then the lights go off and you're like, oh crap, I got 12 hours of this. Possibly, sometimes even more. If you live out in remote areas, like in the hills areas here in Southern California, it's days sometimes.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're at a higher risk over there. So, and you get that more common. Me, it's only been twice in the last couple of months or whatever. There's some people out in the hills that are having this normal, like regularly.
Every windstorm. I think even right now we have Santa Ana's, and I think that there's some shutdowns down in San Diego. And
Yeah.
so, these are the people that, like you and the Jehu Powerwall, that people are looking at other ways to use electricity or to store electricity. People are starting to do this and think about this with solar panels. And then when you start thinking about solar panels, that inverter unit that runs the solar panels, that puts that energy into your house, is the same kind of box that you would use for a car.
Yep.
It's the same kind of power
It's the same
electronics.
thing.
It's exactly.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
And so we're not talking about, we're not dreaming of a future here of technology that doesn't exist. This is all stuff that's being, mass produced at this time. It's just a different way of using it. It's a different way of thinking about these things.
Yeah, so much that box is so much the same that I just had Robert Llewellyn from Fully Charged, and he goes, and he gave me an idea. He goes, Jehu, what you need to do is you need to try and do a DIY version of vehicle to grid. And I'm like thinking like, oh yeah, I could do that. I could just use a grid tie inverter. They go up to like 600 volts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I could totally DIY that. It's like no big deal. Like, he's like, you should do that video, And I go, oh, thank you for the idea. I might just take you up on that.
It's actually not that difficult to do the in direction, because you're basically, what's solar? Solar, whether you have microinverters, some of those is DC.
Yeah.
And so you're just putting DC off the car.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, Mitsubishi did a project in Japan that they had all of these used battery packs, and they hooked them up, and they took solar inverters and modified them to become bidirectional. Because usually solar inverters are going one way. It's just power in. But then they modified them to be bidirectional so that they could discharge.
Also charge.
And then
discharge and then charge.
Right. So they were going back and floating them back and forth. And they had solar on the roof. They had wind. They had vehicles that were in operation that they were plugging in. So they had this whole infrastructure all built up of all these different ways to use electricity off electric vehicles. And it was quite amazing to see that it was basically off the shelf stuff that was slightly modified.
Yeah.
And the question is that the hardware exists, and now what we're doing is we're helping change the regulations that allow these things to happen, that allow people to be able to use these things both on the car itself, but also in the house or in the grid or in the businesses.
Yes.
So, very exciting. But that's one of the key things that CHAdeMO has brought, because go back to the beginning of CHAdeMO. CHAdeMO was developed by a utility company. They weren't developed by a car company. And so CHAdeMO has this much larger view about electricity. than just the car itself. The car is part of the whole view of electricity.
Yes.
And CHAdeMO isn't done yet. CHAdeMO is working on many future projects at this time. CHAdeMO 2.0, higher powered output to be able to charge, up from 200 to 400 kilowatts at a time.
Wow.
So,
is that the target? 400 kilowatts?
That's one of the targets.
Wow. Okay.
This is all in development right now, but also much more. Another avenue that CHAdeMO is working on is they're working with the Chinese on what's called the CHOJI standard.
Okay.
And the CHOJI standard is very interesting because it's a new standard design. There's a clean sheet of paper. And the idea of this is to go beyond just 400 and go up towards a megawatt.
Wow.
Because, in California and in many other places now, we're looking at doing electrified trucks.
Yes. So big rigs.
Batteries.
Yeah.
And how to charge those.
Yeah. That now we need to look into that, right? Because that's a different level, just as important. Here in Southern California, our freeways are just full of trucks, right? And we have two major ports in Southern California, and so there's a lot of goods that come in, and so we need to electrify.
Two major ports that aren't connected to a railhead.
Yes.
Welcome to Southern California development.
Yes.
And so we have all these diesel trucks that pick up the stuff off the boat and drive it, 40 miles to the railhead, and then it comes off there and goes on the railroad and goes out to the western United States.
Yes.
And so one of the first things that they're looking at is these drayage trucks, these trucks that just cart these boxes back and forth. But the point of this is that we have to have we can look forward to a new use for electric vehicle charging at these higher levels. But if we're going to have a clean sheet of paper, why don't we start looking at this? Can we start to come together with one charging standard? Can we find a charging standard that's so generic that you could actually put adapters on your, a little adapter cord to plug into this? So I have a Nissan Leaf that I've had since 2009. You could put an adapter on this standard and charge it with CHAdeMO. Or, so your neighbor comes in with a Chevy Bolt, and they could put a CCS adapter on it and charge. When we start thinking this way, of your Tesla could charge on the same thing, so that we have one charging station, and just like they do in Europe, you have your own little adapter cord that you adapt to it. You plug it into your car, you charge it, you throw your adapter cord back in the trunk, and off you go.
Yeah. That because from the consumer perspective, we don't really care, right? I mean, I don't care if it's CHAdeMO or if it's CCS combo or Tesla or what. What do I care? I just need juice in my car. I need miles, in the tank.
Thank you. You're a CHAdeMO guy already. You don't know it.
Yes.
You just want juice, and that's the point. CHAdeMO just wants to put juice in your tank.
Yeah. Is that compatibility there now? Let's say, because I think my that Rivian that I pre-ordered is gonna have CCS combo, right? I don't know. I think that's what they've gone for, and I did that because I was like, well, how am I gonna charge this? So I kind of did some research. I'm like, oh, CCS combo. Will there be an adapter? Does one side or the other one have to decide to allow compatibility between the two, or how do you think that's gonna work?
Yeah, that's a tough question because CCS and Charin aren't interested in adapting to other standards. Mm-hmm. They want everybody to adapt to their standard. It's the world domination. Yeah,
they do seem to be interested in world domination. I had one of their representatives in the podcast, and it seemed like he was very into that, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's their thing, and it's good or whatever. I mean, whatever floats your boat, I guess. But like I say, from the consumer perspective, I don't care. What do I care? I don't care what the plug is.
As long as it works.
As long as it works.
Safe.
And it's safe.
And that's the most important thing. Again, I go back to is CHAdeMO from the beginning. Safety has always been first. When
Yeah.
utility companies do something, it's all about safety, 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 and then
Yeah.
see if it works.
Yeah.
And
There's a bit more, right? Like you said, if it comes, you do care about the utility. I mean, I don't care too much about the utility, but I do because I want to have power. I don't like it when the power goes away, right? So, like if we're putting solar panels, you want to face them south because that is they're more efficient. But if you want to do the best thing for like society and like the grid, then you face them west here in California, right? So that you don't provide the most of the energy during the early days when there's a surplus, but you provide it once they're like everybody's going home and stuff. So I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good thing, because you can do a little bit good for your pocket. But then, if you collectively help the grid stay on, that's a good thing. So
because that's good. Remember, who pays for the grid?
yes, yeah,
We pay for the grid. The utility companies, they don't get paid for how much electricity they sell. They get paid for providing electricity to all of us. Remember, they are a monopoly. They're a state-sponsored monopoly.
yeah,
They are regulated by the state that basically says that we're going to give you a monopoly, but we're going to control you very carefully for the benefit of the ratepayers.
yeah,
And we pay their bill, but we don't necessarily pay it by how much electricity we spend. It's how much it costs them to provide us the electricity. So whenever we're able to reduce the cost of electricity, of generation, of transmission, it's better for us as ratepayers that we don't have to have a next rate increase. And so that's what we're looking at here. When we look at the bigger infrastructure, is we want electric vehicles to be a benefit to the grid instead of another load.
yeah. So
And
if CCS Combo is not willing to compromise, do you think CHAdeMO will, to as far as compatibility? So let's say that I have my CCS Combo equipped truck, and I'm in the middle of, the USA, somewhere in Texas, somewhere in, well, not Texas. Texas is probably a bad. Well, maybe. Let's say I decide to go to fully charge next year, and on my way there, I find myself on a CHAdeMO station. Do you see a future where maybe I can charge my CCS Combo equipped vehicle with a CHAdeMO charger?
well, that's what we're looking at, is what does the future look like? That's why we're evaluating the CHOGI standard and seeing if that's the basis for us to have a standard that's fully compatible with all the different existing standards and the future. That's the question that CHAdeMO is working with right now, is trying to look at the future and say, how do we provide this? How do we provide a standard that's open, that allows this to happen instead of closing the door?
Yeah.
And that's the big difference between the CCS folks and the rest of us. I don't know what Elon's talking about right now, but they're much more interested in selling cars and making cars work. And that's why they created their own charging system, is they wanted people to charge their cars.
Yeah. And I think Elon doesn't care, to tell you the truth. I think he's publicly said that he will build cars with other charging, which he already does. In Europe, he does, right?
Yeah. And in Japan, he does.
And in Japan, he does. Yeah. So
So that's the point is that, car companies they want to sell cars. And so they're going to provide charging whatever the most chargers are in that area to provide benefit for their customers. Yeah. And so as a supporter of charging standard, we're trying to find what that future is that's going to be safe and compatible for as many vehicles as possible. We're the originators and the pioneers of quick charging, and that came from that same view. We want to provide charging for customers.
Okay. So I guess, I think it's we are a bit in that race right now. How many stations you said there are in the U.S.?
In North
CHAdeMO stations? North
in
America?
North America, let me go double check my numbers here. 6,000 currently.
6,000. Yes.
Yeah.
Most of them in the U.S. probably, right?
Up in Canada too.
Oh, well, Canada. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Canada, they were right behind us. The first one we had in the U.S. was in Vacaville, California.
Oh, Vacaville, of all places.
Yep.
I know that place because there's a big shop that restores Volkswagens there. It's a tiny
Yeah.
town, right? It's not a
Yeah.
huge place. Okay.
It's almost halfway between Sacramento and San Francisco, and they were pioneers with electric vehicle charging back in the 2000s, 2005 to 2010. They were one of the first that had a significant amount of electric vehicles there.
Wow.
And so right off the I-80, CHAdeMO installed the first in North America CHAdeMO charger. And then right behind that, up in Portland, they installed one. And then up in British Columbia, in Vancouver, they installed one, all within about 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And,
Okay.
and I worked with the Canadian government, and they are very strong supporters of electric vehicles. And so there's lots for Canadian. Remember, Canada has the population of California.
Yeah.
So Canadian lots and US lots are different, but by a factor of 10.
Yes.
But
Wow.
they're all across the United States now. There's corridor projects. One of the most exciting was the Green Highway that goes all the way from Vancouver all the way down to California.
And that is finished, right? So right now that exists where you could travel up and down the Western United States charging CHAdeMO.
Oh yeah, that was back in 2013, 14.
Okay.
And I remember standing out there in the rain in a number of those inauguration ceremonies up and down the beautiful Pacific Northwest. And yes, that was developed so that about every 40 miles there was an electric vehicle charging station, and many of those are still in operation. And now with the other charging, with Volkswagen and their Electrify America for their Dieselgate issue, they're putting in numerous charging stations all over the United States, mostly along interstates, and spreading it out into cities and metropolitan areas. That they're putting out CCS, but they're also putting CHAdeMO there too.
Okay.
And so, CHAdeMO is, nationwide, just like you see with the other charging standards.
So it's growing. So it's there's more and more stations being put in the streets.
Yeah, it's continuing to grow. Back to what I was saying of how many vehicles there are out there. There's more vehicles out there that charge CHAdeMO than any other standard.
Yeah, and that's partly because of the huge success of the Leaf, right? I mean, the Leaf. I mean, there were so many Leafs. I don't know, probably still right in the streets. There's so many of them. There was a very, very popular, very, very successful electric vehicle. And they all have, is there any of those versions that do not have CHAdeMO? Or every single Leaf has CHAdeMO?
No, I think that there was, I know for Mitsubishi, I'm pretty sure for the Leaf, I think that they had a CHAdeMO delete option at the beginning.
Oh, I see.
And so that there's some rare ones that won't have a CHAdeMO, but by this time, that's all now CHAdeMO standard equipment.
It's kind of standard. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. Well, yeah, that sounds like it's a good thing. Look, choices are good, and especially if there's going to be some compatibility, I think it's good because as a consumer, you just want to charge, right? And you don't care who's going to win or who's going to. We'll let you guys battle it out, and see who wins. How's the process of, like, let's say someone wants to put a charging station. Let's say someone has a business, whatever. They have a thing. What is the process? Like, they would go to you guys and be like, we want to buy a CHAdeMO capable charging station so that we can install it? Or how does that happen?
Oh, CHAdeMO is now there's I'm looking to see if I have the number, but there's so many different charging station manufacturers. CHAdeMO developed the standard, and it's actually an IEEE standard. It is the only, well, if you talk about global standards, it is the only global standard through IEEE. And so
what is IEEE?
IEEE, oh, you're asking me the tough question. Yeah. International, I'd have to look that one up for the acronym, but it's the same one. It's the IEEE. It's the same international organization that does your Bluetooth, that does any number of electrical standards. That they come up with a global standard, and they have a certification process.
Okay. And you guys are the only ones on the charging of the DC fast charging
the only one currently. And actually, I was on that committee, and we were very sad about that we're the only ones there, because we set that up as the committee to make that available for all different vehicles, so that they could put their vehicles into the standardization process. I mean, put their charging into the process and make it available for them. And IEEE is so funny. Okay, how about, come on, give it to me.
Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers.
There you go. You beat me to it.
The world's largest technical professional organization.
Ah, you beat me to the Google.
I have people. I have a screen in front of me, so
I don't. I'm a one-man army.
Yeah, Brian helped me out there. He posted it. Wow. So, nice. Yeah. Okay. So that's so then that means that regular people can just decide, like, if you're gonna put, if you have a business, if you have a store or whatever, and they're like, oh, let's should put some charging stations here, then they have the ability to choose. Oh, we're gonna put one of each. We're gonna put one of these one of that one of this. So that means CHAdeMO will keep growing. We'll keep. There's more and more stations that will keep happening, and so that means we'll have that choice to do that.
Yeah, it's pretty standard now. I'll tell you a funny story. This is a real behind the scenes story. So I told you about that summit meeting that CHAdeMO had with the CCS guys back in the 2011, I think, time frame. And at that meeting, we said, you know what, the charging stuff inside the box is all the same for CHAdeMO versus your proposed CCS. Why don't we just, if you don't agree with us, why don't we just have one cord on each side?
Yeah.
And we threw that out in the meeting, and then now if you look out there in industry, there's one cord on each side, that there's a CHAdeMO on one side and a CCS on the other side.
So it's great. So it's the same hardware.
But the behind the scenes story was me and another engineer spitballing that. Wow. And we were kind of going, you know what? Most of the stuff will work. We didn't know, because theirs was a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But we threw that out there, and now to look out there, and every time I go by one of those stations with a port on each side, I kind of laugh of going, yeah, that was our wild ass guess at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the same hardware. A charger is a charger, right? It just makes DC, AC from, higher voltage down to, well, actually about the same voltage to DC. Yeah.
It really comes out to be, it's the geometry of the connector.
Yeah.
And then it's the communications protocol. And CHAdeMO uses CAN bus communication, where the CCS uses PLC. And CHAdeMO, your utility company, they don't believe that PLC is a robust solution for vehicle to charger communications. CAN bus is the system that's used on all cars to communicate within the car systems.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the weird thing. The gentleman who I spoke to with from the CCS combo, right? He developed CAN.
Right.
And so he's like saying, like, no, the CCS combo is better because it doesn't use CAN. And I'm like, wait, you developed CAN for automotive use, and you're no longer using it. Now you're using something else, And of course, he said it's much more advanced, whatever he's using, and that's why it's that. But isn't that ironic that it's
so the story behind the story is that what they did with CCS is they had the original level 2 charger, the AC charger.
Yeah, the J1772.
The J1772, the original version. And so I was on the committee when this was decided, and they wanted to use the same communications protocol and the same pins for the DC. And they just added 2 big ports to make the CCS connector. That's how they designed it. They used the existing with 2 additional ports, and they said, well, we can now just have 1 plug. Yeah, that's a very nice design from an ergonomic standpoint, but they just took the PLC that was already there for the low-powered charging, and they used that for the high-powered charging, which it was never designed for.
Oh,
and so there's some politics, and there's some, revisionist history in there, but PLC was not selected because it was a robust solution. It was selected because it was already there.
I see. That's what they didn't have to reinvent the wheel there, or to change all the equipment that was already there, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that I think it's interesting, right? And I think we're gonna. I mean, I'm kind of excited to see, but at the end of the day, like I said, we just want to put juice in our thing. And it is a thing. Like I do like the ergonomics of like Tesla, for example, with their tiny little connector, and it plugs in. But I do understand that theirs is a closed system. It's designed for Teslas and only works for Teslas. And it wouldn't work for every other thing, and so that's how they can get this cable. Yeah, I mean, because this is really short. If you haven't ever used a Tesla, if you're watching this, they have this really tiny connector, and it's really nice and sleek, but it's really short. And there's design that when you park your car, it's like right there, and so you don't have to stretch it. But when you're doing a standard sort of like yours, you have to make that fit with all kinds of cars, right? Even cars that are not in the market, they are being designed right now, and they're going to be designed in the future. And so your chargers and your standard has to be able to work with those. And so a lot of cars...
And that's one of the big challenges, as you know, when you have a longer charger cord or higher powered charging.
Yeah.
That a piece of copper, there's resistance in there. And when you put a lot of electricity through that copper, there's a lot of heat. And that's why you see these new 350 kilowatt chargers that they have liquid cooling.
In the cable.
Because there's so much heat created from that charging. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at with the buses and the trucks and things like that. When you're talking a megawatt of electricity, you're talking this is big.
It's like
power.
Either a cable this big or a cable that has the ability to cool itself with liquid running through it. Yeah.
But then there's the question too, with when you're having that much electricity going through that, how do you plug this in? Do you actually want a human being to plug this in, or do you want a robot to plug this in? Because there's so much electricity there, you can have sparks and you can have flashes and you can have all sorts of things that happen that when you're talking about normal car electricity, that's dangerous enough. But now you're going 20 times the amount that we're charging at right now. So there's a lot of things that we're working on here in the future, but safety is always the key to it. And we have to work around these things. And we also have the idea of how much does Aunt Edna want to lift? How big a charge cord does she really want to lift?
Yeah.
And we got to think about for a human ergonomic point. And that's what Tesla has done. Is they said, hey, we know where our ports are on our cars, so we can make our cord only so long. Whereas with public charging infrastructure, you got to be able to stretch it in all sorts of different directions. And
Yeah, Leafs have it in the front, but the Rivian's gonna have it in the back. You know, and so they're the same station. so
Yeah.
so that means the cable has to be longer and be able to go on the opposite sides of the cars and all these other things. There's way more challenges to be compatible with different vehicles, and you lose some of that sleekness. You know, the CHAdeMO plug it's kind of big, right? It's rounded, and
Hmm.
and it's got a big connector and stuff. And it just has to be that way, I think, just because of the compatibility issues and stuff.
Well, another
Um,
funny story about that is that that was what we had starting in 2005.
mhm.
And the idea was always to make a better plug, to make a better, a more sleeker plug. But because Nissan went to market in 2009, there was no time to
Oh, so you
change
guys just
that.
got grandfathered in on that.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
no
so
way.
we all, remember the story I told you about sitting down with the CCS guys. We're saying, you know what? We're open to changing the geometry of this plug. This was only our prototype idea. But
Oh, wow.
now we have the prototype idea, in
Millions.
35,000 charging stations all over the world.
Yeah, because didn't the Leaf sell like millions of them? Wasn't there like.
I think they're up there. I think they're probably coming close to a million, or they came over a million really, really,
Yeah.
recently.
So there's quite of those cars now. You can't change it. Or if you change it, it's got to be backwards compatible kind of thing.
And that's the
Uh,
whole point of what CHAdeMO is looking at with the Choji standard, or just
yeah.
the future evolution of CHAdeMO is how do you take care of these?
Yeah.
It's not going to be like we did in the 2000s at the beginning when we had the older generation electric vehicles, and although the Costco's had a charging station out front, that they had one flavor for GM and one flavor for Ford and one flavor for somebody else, and they all got abandoned. And those cars, they basically got abandoned because they couldn't charge anymore. And
Yeah.
so, we can't do that when we have millions of vehicles on the road. We have to maintain, backward compatibility. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things that CHAdeMO's looking at. How do we say it's safe? How do we charge cars? And how do we maintain backward compatibility? Because we want to support
Yeah.
electric transportation.
Yeah. And how do you move forward in the future with bigger cars and faster charging speeds? Because that's a dream, right? You want to be able to show up somewhere and have a 50 kilowatt hour battery pack in your car, plug it in for 2 minutes, and
Mhm.
charge at 400 kilowatt rate, maybe. And that's how maybe you get the cables to not, you know, completely melt. Is because you're only charging for 2 minutes. So then you let them rest. That's the dream. That's where we want to go, and I think we'll get there. I think definitely, especially with this proposition of going above 350 kilowatt, right, or whatever it was. Yeah, we're definitely experiencing that now with our Teslas.
Mhm.
We're experiencing 120, 150 sometimes charging speeds, and yeah, man, that's where it's at. That's where you want to be at.
And
So
also, when you have a big battery pack and you're able to charge at those speeds, you don't
yeah,
have to, as you know, you don't have to fully charge the battery. You
no,
can charge the battery. Hey, I'll charge the battery for 10 minutes
yep,
and get 50% of my battery pack. And that's enough to get me to the next charging station that's 150 miles away. And
yeah,
I'll hit it for 10 minutes up there when I go in to get a cup of coffee. And
yeah,
that idea of opportunity charge is what more people are considering now that batteries have gone down in price.
yeah,
But as we all hope, we're always hoping for this breakthrough of the next generation battery that the questions and comments and concerns we have now will be that'll be old, because
yeah.
we're going to have a new battery that's going to be
Well,
able to be 2x 3x better than what we have now, but we haven't found that one
we
yet. We're
have
still
found it.
looking.
No, there's no magical battery. I'm sorry. I think it's gonna be a while. I mistakenly thought that Elon was gonna talk about the next gen battery technology and his battery day, and I'm like, oh, he's just talking about how he's gonna make this lithium ion battery technology better, faster, cheaper. Like, that's it. This is it. Like, there's no magical battery coming in.
That's
Like,
right.
there's just, I mean, maybe it's in the lab, but it's not ready. It's not ready for prime time. So if it was, he wouldn't be putting that much effort into the current technology, right? And so
That's right.
this is what we got, and I think it's true. Like, I think with infrastructure, you don't need huge battery. You don't need a giant thing. The
That's right.
battery that we have right now, it's good enough. You don't need 500 miles of range in your car. Nobody needs that. If you have like charging every 10 minutes, every 10 miles, right? So it's infrastructure. I think the infrastructure is a better use of resources instead of bigger batteries, And so, if you could cut the battery size in half, then that means you can make that much more cars.
That's true.
So,
and the number of the Japanese manufacturers have actually been doing that. They have customers over there that look at it and they i-MiEV first came out with a 16 kilowatt hour battery, and that was good for 65 miles. Wow. But then in Japan, they actually were selling one that had a 12 kilowatt hour battery, that they took a quarter of the battery out and they were able to sell it for a lower price.
Yeah.
And customers were saying, you know what? I never drive this car a long way. Yeah. I could use just a small car. Yeah. And I still have my i-MiEV sitting out in the driveway here, and that's what I use it for. I love running it around town. It's a great car to do that with. But because it's a small subcompact car, it's not a car I'm going to take on a road trip.
Yeah.
And so, I'm happy to see with Tesla and the new cars that are coming out these days that now we're getting to cars that are built to be a one car solution for people. And that's where, the electric vehicle industry is continuing to mature. And what we need to do is we need to continue to mature the electric vehicle charging industry so that we have chargers, like you said. If we have millions and millions of cars in California, you would think that I should be able to park my car in a large commercial parking lot somewhere and there would be a number of electric vehicle chargers there. Yeah. Now, most of the time, there's no electric vehicle chargers. Yeah. That's the big hurdle that we're all as a community need to address is how to make electric vehicle charging everywhere, not just this fast charger over here or this fast charger over here. Yeah. But when I go down to the grocery store, I can quickly throw my car on charge and I can have that opportunity charge like we were just talking about. Yeah. That gets me to the next place that I just throw my car on to charge there while it's parked there. And before you know it, I'm charged up.
Yep. Yeah, and you think about it, it's not that hard. Every single parking lot structure in the U.S. has electricity in it already. Has
they have lights.
They have lights. They have sockets. They have electricity, right? All you need to do is throw a few more extra conduits with bigger cables in there and, put a couple of chargers. I mean, it's like electricity is like everywhere. So chargers should be everywhere. Every parking spot should have at least, a level 2 charger.
And interesting, I think LA is doing it and I think San Francisco is doing it. I know LA DWP is doing it, that they have a street light project. So for people who park on the street in LA, the street lights have power. And now they're installing battery chargers on those street lights.
Wow, that's
so somebody
cool.
can park their car at the curb.
I've seen one already. Yes, I've been to East LA. In fact, of all places, we drove by some, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's a charger, and that just a regular pole. I thought like that's just a weird place to put it on, but I guess. So they're already starting to put them out there. That's a good thing.
But your comment's funny because. That's one of the things that I've been looking at for a long time, and CHAdeMO fully supports, is that East LA should not be a funny place for chargers. But that was the view for a long time, is that electric vehicles are a rich person's toy. Yeah. And it's not, is that electric vehicles are for everybody. That I've met many people. I remember I was at a Nissan dealer. Remember you talked about the Nissan charging stations? I was at a Nissan dealer and I was talking to this lady who was charging her car in front of me. And she lived in East LA. and she bought that Nissan Leaf, and she did the math, and she says, this Nissan Leaf with the free charging costs me less than gas cost used to cost me for my car. And she says, this is really serious to me, because now I have basically a free car, a nice free car, whereas before I was never able to have a new car.
Whoa.
And this, it improves, this technology improves my standard of living. I don't have to worry about oil changes. I don't have to worry about, fixing the engine and the coolant and all the other things. I can just drive my car and charge it now. And that gives me more time to spend with my kids.
Yep.
And when I heard that, it's like, electric vehicles are for everybody.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's, let's go back to the beginning of the pioneering times of why did CHAdeMO do this? Because we wanted to make sure that everybody could charge their cars, no matter where they were.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a good economic sense. It makes good environmental sense. You also worked for the
CARB?
CARB, right?
Yeah, I started my career at CARB.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, because I just had someone from there. I don't have the name of the person that we had. I don't remember his name, but you probably know him.
Probably.
And it was so interesting to know that I didn't know the differences between smog and then the particulates. Dr. Matt Miyasato.
Oh, yeah, from South Coast AQMD.
Yes.
Matt's a great guy. He gets it. And he's also a big EV supporter.
Yes.
His team has the EV projects for South Coast AQMD.
Yeah. And I mean, I really didn't know the differences between the two different things, the particulates, right? And then, which is the smog, right? Essentially. And then the CO2 emissions, right? So, or, whatever, the carbon emissions. Yeah. Right. So I'm like, oh, there's the ones that you can see and then the ones that we breathe. I mean, I guess we breathe both, but there are the ones that are.
That's the big problem is we breathe both.
Yes.
But that CO2, wait a second. Oh, wait a second. I just emitted CO2 right there.
Yeah.
The particulate emissions, and that's the interesting part of, my career, is that I started, and I am a true believer that I remember I moved to the Los Angeles basin in 1990.
Okay.
And my office at the Air Resources Board was right off the 10 freeway in El Monte, and it was facing Mount Wilson. And back in the 90s, it was a rare day that you could see Mount Wilson from El Monte, which is 15 miles?
I lived in El Monte from 88 till 15 years ago. So yeah, you could never see the mountains.
You and I were driving around together.
Yes.
And you could not see the mountains. And then, but the interesting thing is, by the time I left ARB in 1999, the standards that we put into place for the the low emission vehicle standard, the zero emission vehicle standard, and the cleaner burning gasoline standards that ARB promulgated, that by 1999, it was an abnormal day that you couldn't see Mount Wilson.
Wow.
And, we got to remember where we came from.
Yes.
And what the future is going to bring is last night I was mountain biking up above Corona, and I was up on this ridge, and I could see Mount San Jacinto, Mount San Gorgonio, and Mount Baldy all at the same time. And San Jacinto is 70 miles away.
Yeah.
And now it's standard that we see these things. How much have all these cars that we drive now and now will in the future create a better environment for all of us to live in.
Yeah. So we're making strides, right? We're making better.
Oh yeah.
But we have a long way to go, especially here in Southern California, right? I didn't know that we're so far behind the federal standards. Right?
Well, unfortunately, LA was known by the Indians as the Valley of the Smokes.
Oh, wow.
So that before people moved into the Los Angeles area, there was already photochemical smog because of the pine trees.
Because of the
pine trees give off hydrocarbons. And so all the hydrocarbons for those pine trees, because of LA is like a big soup bowl with a top on it. And then you put the sunlight on it, and all of that soup of all of those emissions gets cooked and creates those particulates that Matt was telling you about. But it's because of all those big, beautiful mountains that we have around us, and we have those pine trees, and now we have only what 15, 20 million people now?
Closer to 20, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of emissions out there that get cooked, but when you look up there and you see a blue sky still, you know that what we've done, how we've changed cars over our lifetimes, has really made sense and really has helped us.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how do we go into the future?
Yeah. Well, electric. I think electric, fully electric. So at the very least, there are people. There's a lot of naysayers. They say that we're just moving emissions down the cable lines, right? There's some truth to that or whatever, but at least here in Southern California, that's a good thing. Let's move the emissions somewhere else, and then let's clean the grid up, right? So that's a good thing. The grids are getting cleaner and cleaner, and so then the emissions will be diminished. And so I think we're doing good. I think it's hard to tell right now, like you say, because we don't notice it, right? We only hear the bad headlines. We see but yeah, I remember talking to a person that I used to work with in El Monte, and he used to tell me that, back in the 70s, back in the 80s and 70s, you can see, it was terrible. You can breathe, your eyes would water. And I'm like, oh, really? So this is better? Like now it's better? That's weird. There's more cars. We think that things are worse and worse. That's kind of an inclination, though, we always seem to have, to think that things were better in the past, but it doesn't always seem to be the case, right? And so,
no, we're looking at the future here, and they talk about electric vehicles all the time about you're just moving the emissions somewhere else. But if you've driven up the 395 up towards Mammoth lately, and you drive out there in the Mojave Desert and you see these solar farms. There are hundreds, if not thousands of acres of solar panels that, like we were talking about earlier, there's so much solar electricity and wind power that's now available that now these cars are driven on a large proportion of very, very clean electricity. Yeah. It's not the old days. There's no coal-fired power plants in California anymore.
Yeah.
The electricity, the grid in California is very, very clean, and there's more and more solar going up all the time.
Yep.
And before you know it, I think that they're required that it gets to 50% sometime soon.
2021, all new construction has to have it. All new construction has to have solar. Yeah. So
I'm talking about the grid totally.
I see
the utility companies are spending a lot of money to put up wind power and solar power, and there's lots of investment in that too, because those solar farms out there are done by investors, and they're able to. That's the new power plant. Instead of building a gas-fired power plant down here, they put up a solar farm in the Mojave Desert, and before you know it, look at all the clean power.
Yeah, I think we just need to invest in more storage, right? And I don't know if it's like grid scale storage. I think there should be a lot of grids, but also individually in every garage we should all have a battery, and it could be our car, but it could also be a separate one. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. And I think that's what we need here. I think that's what would help a lot of the problems that we're currently facing in Southern California. Yeah. And so I think you're doing a good job making that future become true. So I want to thank you for coming and joining me and talking a little bit about charging and infrastructure and electric vehicles.
It's definitely been my pleasure. It really is. CHAdeMO Association is trying our best to help electric vehicles and help electric vehicle drivers, and you're doing a great job of educating people and telling them, what can be done. And your cars, I am inspired. You're one of the new hot rodders, that you're taking just wonderful old cars and electrifying them and you're showing people that you can do this. This isn't something that's strange. This is just another way to drive a car. And I think that's really cool. I love your stuff, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for watching and stuff. All right, we'll have you again in the future. I want to talk to you about your other ventures. Like, we didn't get to talk about those today, but we'll have you again another time. And because you've done a lot of interesting stuff in your career, and so yeah, we'll have you in the future. Okay.
I look forward to it anytime.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.